there is this concern that, for example, North Korea may go to war with South Korea, and there could be a nuclear conflict between China and the United States.
From the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, this is the Security Nexus webinar. And I'm your host, James Minnich, Colonel United States Army retired and professor at DKI APCSS. Today is Monday, December 18th. Over the next hour, join us as we explore the intricate nuclear landscape of the Indo Pacific. Amid rising tensions and complex security challenges, this region stands at the forefront of nuclear strategy, where 6 nuclear-armed states and 3 threshold nuclear powers intersect. In Northeast Asia, recent Pentagon assessments reveal that China possesses more than 500 nuclear warheads and is on a trajectory to triple that by 2035. Iran's study suggests that North Korea may have as many as 100 weapons and will double that by 2027. South Asia presents its own dynamics, as SIPRI estimates that India has 164 weapons and Pakistan 170. The United States and Russia are the other 2 nuclear-armed states in the Indo-Pacific, and both of them have well over 5,000 weapons apiece. The presence of 3 threshold nuclear powers, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, add to the region's strategic complexity. As we engage in this critical conversation, we want to recognize and thank the audience for submitting very thoughtful questions at registration. We'll address those questions later on in the show. Today, we're honored to have Dr. Lami Kim from DKI APCSS join us here. Dr. Kim, a distinguished expert in nuclear proliferation and Northeast Asia security, boasts an impressive background, which includes being a mid-career nuclear cadre member at CSIS, a non-resident visiting scholar at George Washington's Institute for Korean Studies, a Mansfield Luce Asia Scholar, and an adjunct fellow at Pacific Forum. Aloha, Lami. It's a privilege to have you here with us today.
James. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. I wonder if you'd begin by telling us your journey that brought you from where you were to this path along to becoming this renowned, this expert in nuclear deterrence and Asia security.
Well, thank you for the introduction, but I'm still a junior scholar. I'm still growing as a nuclear expert in Asia, Asian security expert. But I have been working on nuclear issues and more broadly nuclear and North Korean security issues for the past 10 years or more, 15 years or so. And people ask me often, how did you get into the nuclear field? But for me, it was actually pretty natural that I became interested in nuclear weapons. Obviously, I'm from South Korea. I was born and raised in South Korea. And ever since I can remember, I faced threats posed by North Korea's nuclear weapons. I grew up with North Korea's nuclear weapons program. And later, I was a Middle East major, and I served as a South Korean diplomat working on Middle East issues, Middle East security issues, including Iran's nuclear weapons program. And so naturally, I became interested in nuclear issues. And after I joined the PhD program, I wrote my dissertation on the global nuclear non-proliferation regimes, more specifically the nuclear export control regimes. And since then, since I graduated from graduate school, I've been working and researching and teaching about nuclear issues and international security issues.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I want to go ahead and start us off then with thinking about the nuclear landscape and how it's undergone this significant transformation with these emerging new nuclear states, as it were. And each were propelled by distinct geopolitical motivations and regional dynamics. In 1964, in my lifetime, China entered the nuclear realm, seeking to cement its status as a global power. This was followed by India in 1974, developing its nuclear capabilities amidst, its own regional rivalries. Pakistan entry in 1998 was probably in response to India. And North Korea joining in 2006 pursued these nuclear weapons amidst its own international isolation and pressing security concerns. So given these diverse backgrounds and the unique factors that are driving each country's nuclear ambitions, I'm interested in your perspective on these specific motivations behind their decisions to develop nuclear weapons. I might also ask you then to shed light on the wider implications that these developments have on regional stability and security dynamics.
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, China developed its nuclear weapons in the 1960s because the United States threatened to use nuclear weapons against China in the 1950s during the Korean War and during a crisis between China and Taiwan. And so in order to protect itself from a nuclear attack or the threat of nuclear attack by the United States, China developed nuclear weapons. And that made India nervous because initially India didn't consider China as a security threat, but China annexed Tibet. And after that, the two countries went to a war in 1962 over disputed territories in the Himalayas. And so China's nuclear weapons development made India very nervous. And India actually developed nuclear weapons based on nuclear systems that it received from Canada and the United States for the civil nuclear program, but conducted its first nuclear device in 1974. India actually wanted to get security guarantee from either the United States or the Soviet Union, but failed to do so, and decided to develop its own nuclear deterrent. That obviously, as you mentioned, led Pakistan to develop its own nuclear weapons, especially after the 1971 war between Pakistan and India. Pakistan realized that even though the United States was an ally of Pakistan, the alliance was more of a anti-communist alliance. And it was clear to Pakistan that the United States is not going to protect Pakistan from India's nuclear threats. And Pakistan acquired the ability to make nuclear weapons by the 1980s already, but didn't test its nuclear weapon until 1998. And lastly, North Korea, obviously, after the Soviet Union fell in the early 1990s, or 1985, 89, the Soviet Union was the only security guarantor. And after the Cold War ended, North Korea found itself in a very hostile environment. It was very isolated. China established diplomatic relations with South Korea, and other communist countries in Eastern Europe did the same. And so in order to protect itself in this very hostile environment from North Korea's perspective, North Korea developed nuclear weapons. The regional implications, well, some argue that actually nuclear weapons have a stabilizing effect, especially it is a good thing that India and Pakistan both have nuclear weapons because, they have nuclear deterrent and they have the ability to inflict unacceptable harm against each other. And so they have been behaving pretty cautiously, and there hasn't been a major war between the two countries, except for the 1999 Kargil War, which was also still a pretty small-scale war. However, there have been some border skirmishes in a small-scale wars, and so because of the belief that there is not going to be a major war between two nuclear weapon states, they may go into small-scale wars more often. And also, obviously, the more nuclear weapons, the higher chance of accidental use of nuclear war. And so just last year, India accidentally sent a missile to Pakistan. And thankfully, Pakistani officials thought that there was something wrong about this, and so they didn't respond, but it could have escalated into a nuclear war. And so when there are nuclear weapons, there is a chance of a nuclear war. And so there is this concern that, for example, North Korea may go to war with South Korea, and there could be a nuclear conflict between China and the United States.
So I think I agree with you that there's less of probability that states may intentionally, with nuclear weapons, intentionally strike the other. But I wonder if there's more to it than that. In fact, I wonder that the probability of going to nuclear war is more likely to come through accidents. And I was reading last night Martin Sherwin's book, Gambling on Armageddon, and it's a couple-year-old book, but it reminded me of how close we've been over and over and over again. Is it? What do you think? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that is a real concern. During the Cold War, also, there were some mistakes that could have led to a war between the United States and Soviet Union. And also, I mean, during the Cold War, there were a small number of nuclear weapons countries, and then they were able to establish direct communication channels, and they were able to establish some sort of a standard operating procedures. However, now we have more nuclear weapons countries. And so we have 9 nuclear weapons countries, and some countries like North Korea doesn't really have a very stable government. And if, for example, the regime collapses, and what's going to happen to nuclear weapons there? And also, if there is especially in North Korea or some other countries where the leader has to worry about their regime security, and they have to look tough to the audience, their domestic audience, and they may resort to nuclear weapons if things don't really go well for them in order to ensure regime survival. And so, for example, if there is a small-scale conflict between China and the United States, or China with Taiwan, with the intervention of other countries, and if things don't go well, then China may threaten to use nuclear weapons. That's what Russia is doing with Ukraine. And then things may get out of control.
That's well said. Building on our discussion, I want to turn our focus to China's current nuclear strategy. We're witnessing a significant shift as China rapidly modernizes, diversifies, and expands its nuclear arsenal. This expansion is not just the number of warheads, right? But we're talking about an increase in sophistication of the variety of nuclear delivery mechanisms. Historically, China has adhered to a policy of minimum deterrence, maintaining its nuclear capabilities at the lowest level deemed necessary for national security. However, the current trajectory suggests a possible departure from that stance. So I wonder if you might elaborate on whether China is in fact moving away from its principle of minimum deterrence. And then maybe additionally, we might hear about your perspective on the broader factors that are driving China's nuclear development, its buildup.
Yeah, sure. That is a very important question. I mean, obviously, we don't really know for sure what is driving China's nuclear buildup, what Xi Jinping is thinking. However, there are several possibilities. One is that China is expanding its nuclear arsenal in order to acquire the great power status, because China may have over 500 nuclear warheads, but the United States have over 3,700 in stockpile if you include those nuclear weapons that have retired and awaiting dismantlement, over 5,000 nuclear weapons. Russia has approximately sort of a similar number of nuclear warheads as well. And so China's nuclear arsenal is still very small in comparison. And so maybe China thinks that now it has economic capabilities and military capabilities, and in order to really be regarded as a great power, commensurate its overall capabilities, and China may need to have a bigger nuclear arsenal. That is one possibility. Another possibility is that China may be thinking about using nuclear weapons on the battlefield, not for deterrent purposes, but for coercive purposes. For example, in the Taiwan contingency, if things don't go well, then China may threaten to use nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons. So that is another possibility, but that is not, that hypothesis is not very convincing because China is not developing tactical nuclear weapons as of today. And so So that is not very likely. Another possibility, and I think this explanation is most convincing. China is expanding its nuclear arsenals actually in order to have ensure its second strike capabilities or nuclear retaliatory capability. It is sticking to the minimum deterrence policy, but simply China now thinks that it needs a larger nuclear arsenal in order to ensure its survival or the survival of its nuclear arsenal, because the United States is developing or enhancing its ballistic missile capabilities, and also it's advancing conventional capabilities or precision strike capabilities. And so now with this advancing capabilities of the United States, China may think that, China traditionally for a while had about 200 nuclear warheads. This 200 nuclear warheads is not going to be enough in order to. So if the United States attacks China, China needs to have a nuclear arsenal that survives the US's attacks in order to so that China can retaliate against the United States. This capability will basically then deter the US's first strike or nuclear strike against China. And so I think that is, for now, the most convincing hypothesis.
Now, China still maintains a no first use policy, is that right?
Yeah.
So principally then it's still developing a deterrent capability?
Yeah, so China is sticking to no first use policy, but the question is.
So is it still in its development? You still think it's developing a deterrent capability and not a? Yeah,
and I think that China is still. I mean, that is another example, another evidence that China is thinking about viewing nuclear weapons more for deterrent purposes, because China is sticking to no first use policy. And of course, if push comes to shove, and it's not, I cannot guarantee that China will stick to no first use policy. However, China is not deploying nuclear weapons at this point. The United States has over 1,700 nuclear weapons deployed, meaning they can be launched at any moment, but China hasn't deployed any nuclear weapons. So I think that shows that China's, at least for now, is sticking to no first use policy and views nuclear weapons more for deterrent purposes.
Let's explore the broader geopolitical ramifications of this trend. Specifically, I'm interested in understanding the implications of China's expanding nuclear capabilities for the United States and its allies in the Indo Pacific region. So how do you think this escalation in China's nuclear arsenal and delivery system might affect the region's security dynamics, particularly concerning the strategic positions and policies of the United States and its regional allies?
Yeah. So even if China's nuclear strategy is more defensive than offensive, I think that still that has significant implications for the United States and its allies in the region, because obviously I'm not too worried about China attacking the United States, with nuclear weapons during peacetime, because obviously the United States has the ability to retaliate against China. However, if China secures its second strike capability, that will make it much more costly for the United States to intervene in regional conflicts involving China. For example, if China attacks Taiwan, and it is critical for the United States to intervene very fast in order to defend Taiwan. But if the US's interventions may lead to China's nuclear attack against the US mainland, then that may make the president of the United States think twice about defending Taiwan. I'm not saying that, therefore, the president of the United States will not defend Taiwan. I'm just saying that, because of increasing nuclear capabilities, it becomes more complicated for the United States to intervene in regional conflicts. And also, if that becomes clear and more countries in the region think that is a possibility, the US will not likely intervene and defend its allies and partners in the region. And then in countries like South Korea, Japan, and even Australia, probably not Australia, but that they may have to think about how to defend themselves if
Yes.
the United States doesn't seem like a credible ally anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's shift a little bit, and I want to move our focus towards the critical aspects of regional dynamics with regards to the relations now of China, India, and Pakistan. And so, given the history of border clashes and these broader competition between China and India, is it plausible that China's nuclear development, or its buildup rather, I guess, is that it could be a source of concern for India and then potentially prompting India to expand its nuclear arsenal? And so in this context, I'm interested in your perspective on how India's response to China's nuclear advancement could affect the strategic stability of India and Pakistan. And do you foresee then a possibility of a trilateral nuclear arms race in the region with China, India, and Pakistan?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned earlier, India's nuclear weapons program was driven by China's nuclear threats. And as it is now, India's nuclear arsenal is not that big. According to SIPRI, Stockholm Institute of Peace Research, India, as of early 2023, had about 164 nuclear weapons. And if it is true that China has over 500, then India's nuclear arsenal is far smaller. Well, India has not been increasing the number of its nuclear weapons rapidly. However, China's nuclear buildup may change that trend. And that certainly will make Pakistan feel very nervous of its own nuclear and conventional capabilities because Pakistan, according to SIPRI, has 170, slightly bigger than India's nuclear arsenal. However, when it comes to conventional capabilities, Pakistan is far inferior to India. Already, Pakistan feels very nervous about India's developing conventional capabilities like ballistic missile capabilities and more like advanced conventional technologies. India's, for example, recent anti-satellite tests demonstrates its ability to shoot down ballistic missiles, and that makes India very nervous and disrupts its strategic stability between the two countries. And so I think it is very possible that we will see a trilateral nuclear arms race among the three countries. The strategic stability between Pakistan and India is being disrupted, and that will disrupt the strategic stability between India and Pakistan.
Let's consider another pivotal state in the region's nuclear landscape, and that's North Korea. North Korea's nuclear missile is not only expanding in terms of weapons and its capabilities, but missile capabilities, but the nation has also expressed a resolute stance on not bargaining with its nuclear arsenal. And this, I guess, came out September last year, right after it promulgated its law on the policy of its nuclear forces. And that law even outlined a potential preemptive use of its nuclear weapons. And so, moreover, recent developments indicate a strengthening of security ties between North Korea and Russia. And so this evolving relationship is a significant factor in the geopolitical equation. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the implication of this closer North Korea-Russia relationship, particularly concerning North Korea's nuclear weapons program, and how might this partnership influence the strategic balance in the region? And then maybe what does it mean for the future of nuclear diplomacy and security in the Indo Pacific? This is rather complicated.
Yeah, sure. Well, a tightening relationship between Russia and North Korea is very concerning in many aspects. One is that, it's going to undermine the effectiveness of economic sanctions against North Korea. North Korea has been under sanctions for a very long time, and now both Russia and China have been helping helping North Korea evade economic sanctions, right? And allegedly, North Korea has transferred ammunitions to Russia recently.
Significant amounts.
Yeah, it has not been fully verified, I think, but there are many satellite images, both released by Washington and also commercial satellite images, show that North Korea has transferred arms and especially ammunitions to Russia, which will provide North Korea, if that is true, with enormous amount of revenues. And so that's going to undermine the effectiveness of sanctions. And Russia now is boycotting the UN Security Council resolutions, even condemning North Korea's testing of intercontinental ballistic missiles in violation of UN Security Council resolutions, which Russia itself supported. And so now it is, let alone imposing more sanctions against North Korea, just condemning North Korea's violation of UN Security Council resolutions is difficult. And also, rumor has it that Russia has already helped North Korea successfully place its spy satellite into orbit, which North Korea did in November this year, after 2 failed attempts earlier this year. It is possible that North Korea just pulled it up by itself, but it is also possible that Russia provided some sort of a technical assistance, even if it is not a transfer of the sensitive technology, just providing some consultations, just pointing out what the problems were, and that would have been probably very helpful. And so, if that is true, that is a big concern, especially North Korea doesn't really have, didn't used to have good ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities. And this spy satellite is going to help North Korea see what is going on about the US's and South Korea's military movements, and which will help North Korea with preemptive strikes if it decides to do so. At this point, the satellites don't seem to have very good resolution, so not going to be very useful. But if Russia provides more assistance, that's going to be a big concern. And also, there has been speculation that Russia will provide assistance, North Korea with assistance in building nuclear power submarines or building advanced conventional fighter jets, 4.5 generation fighter jets. If that happens, it's going to really sort of disrupt the balance between South Korea and North Korea, because even though South Korea doesn't have nuclear weapons, South Korea has superior conventional capabilities to North Korea. But if North Korea develops its also conventional capabilities significantly, that will make South Korea feel very nervous.
Listening to you reminded me of a thickening of the relationship that has occurred here recently. Defense Minister Shoigu, Russian Defense Minister, was just in Pyongyang in July for celebration of the armistice, and then when was it? It was in September. Was it early October that Kim Jong-un went to Russia, and he was out there for 10 days. And then Foreign Minister Lavrov came back to North Korea on a visit. And these are significant, high-level engagements that must mean something. I think there's probably something there to your thoughts of some type of assistance that North Korea probably received to be able to help finally successfully put into space the Cholima satellite. So how about a little bit about North Korea's missile development? That's been quite significant, whether we're talking, in fact, just here this last, when was it, yesterday?
Mhm.
Another successful launch of ICBM, probably Hwasong 18, right? A
Mhm.
solid fuel missile that has been successfully launched twice earlier this year.
Mhm.
I mean, say more.
Yeah, sure. Well, so North Korea has developed intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach anywhere in the United States. Already, Hwasong 15 had that reach, and Hwasong 18 is the largest ICBM in history. Is that right? I think, and it's called monster missile because it's so big. Because it is so big, it can carry multiple nuclear warheads and multiple re-entry vehicle, which will make it very difficult for the United States' ballistic missile defense system to shoot them down, right? And then also the fact that it is solid fueled missile, that is significant because solid fuel missiles do not need a long time before to be launched, and so which means that it will reduce the amount of time that the U.S. ballistic missile can detect and shoot down a missile. And in addition to ICBMs, North Korea has successfully launched submarine launched
I think
ballistic
it was earlier
missiles.
this year. When was it? Was it in September
Yeah,
or so? But it was a little bit earlier.
yeah,
It was a Romeo class
yeah.
submarine that had 10 launch tubes,
Mhm,
not insignificant,
mhm,
and what it pretends that could have come.
mhm.
But
Yeah, yeah, sure. That is very concerning. And North Korea is emphasizing, it's trying really hard to develop its underwater capabilities and hypersonic light vehicle. I mean, that will also neutralize the US's ballistic missile system. So it is concerning that North Korea is advancing its missile capabilities, and also it is not absolutely clear if North Korea has acquired the re-entry vehicle technology. If North Korea acquires that, then that will mean that North Korea will have the ability to launch a nuclear attack against the United States. And so, yeah, then that means that the US will be directly vulnerable to North Korea's nuclear threats. That has a lot of implications for its extended deterrence and its national security as well.
I started professional career in Korea as an artilleryman who was involved in then tactical nuclear release, authentication, and delivery, and was there a number of times. And so in that decade, it was a prominent aspect of the US's operational plans for being able to defend Korea was to be able to employ tactical nuclear weapons. And so here we are now with almost a flip of a coin with North Korea developing its nuclear weapons and its tactical nuclear weapons as well, and how it seeks to have a doctrine that would employ an asymmetric deterrence to be able to, as you mentioned earlier, maybe to counter or hold at bay as it sees a superior conventional force that comes out of the combined forces of the United States and South Korea, but then have some type of assured deterrent capability to be able to, counter value force to be able to try to hold at bay any development of a tactical use if it were to arise to that, to a strategic use. It's you said you grew up in a nuclear in the shadow of nuclear forces or developing forces. In those early years, all the way up and through the 70s, South Korea had a nuclear weapons program. And so maybe we'll turn our attention and talk about South Korea, who finds itself at a crucial juncture with this changing security guarantees and evolving alliance dynamics. And they're influencing nuclear policy decisions there in South Korea as well. So given the seeming improbability that North Korea is going to denuclearize, and the increasing public support in South Korea for developing its own nuclear weapons, which is, I think, indicative of a recent poll that had over 70% approval of developing their own program. I wonder what the possibilities might be of South Korea actually pursuing that path. Thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably like several years ago when people talked about, oh, South Korea is going nuclear, I thought, or some South Korean politicians calling for nuclear armament, that idea would have been considered as a fringe idea, but not anymore. Now, the president of South Korea, President Yoon Suk-yeol, even just publicly talked about the possibility of South Korea's nuclear armament. And many politicians are talking about it, and South Korean public seems to support it. So that is a concerning phenomenon. Well, I still think that it's very unlikely that South Korea will acquire nuclear weapons anytime soon, because you mentioned the 1970s when President Park Chung-hee pursued nuclear weapons program, and President Park Chung-hee had to give up its nuclear weapons program due to the pressure of the United States, especially the threat that the U.S. would withdraw its security guarantee. And at that time, especially South Korea didn't really have any nuclear technology capability. And so it would have taken South Korea a long time to develop nuclear weapons. And without the U.S.'s security guarantee, South Korea would have been very vulnerable to North Korea's conventional capabilities, which were actually more stronger. So that threat, I think, still is valid, even though now South Korea will be able to develop nuclear weapons pretty quickly within 3 to 5 years. Different people say different things, but probably 3 to 5 years. And during that period of time, now North Korea has nuclear weapons. And during the period of time, South Korea will be critically vulnerable to North Korea's nuclear threats. Some say that actually the U.S. will not withdraw its security guarantee. So that is pretty interesting. Interestingly, more and more American policymakers and policy pundits, still the minority, but they argue that the U.S. will have to condone South Korea's nuclear armament. But it's not clear if the President Biden or the next president will actually support or at least condone South Korea's nuclear armament. And so potentially the costs will be very high. And even if the US condones South Korea's nuclear armament, China is not going to be happy about that idea. And China will impose economic sanctions. If you recall, China's economic sanctions after the US's deployment of that missile defense system on South Korean soil, that was hugely destructive for South Korea's economy. The scale of economic sanctions would be even larger if South Korea developed its own nuclear weapons. And South Korea's reputation will suffer greatly. So I have been arguing that instead of acquiring nuclear weapons, what South Korea is pursuing is nuclear hedging strategy. Okay. So try to acquire the ability to build nuclear weapons quickly, but stopping short of actually acquiring nuclear weapons. So in order to do that, South Korea has been pursuing the ability to produce nuclear fissile materials, enrichment or reprocessing technologies. South Korea has the the know-how, technical capability to do so, but the United States has been preventing South Korea from acquiring those technologies. And so South Korea has been trying to persuade the United States to sort of revise the bilateral agreement that prevents South Korea from doing so now.
South Korea would have to travel the road that North Korea traveled to develop nuclear weapons, and that is to abrogate the non-nuclear proliferation treaty under Article 10, which permits a state to do it. But we know that it didn't go so well after North Korea followed that path. And so I would agree with you that it would be a lonely road in the wilderness for a while,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yeah, but that's why nuclear hedging strategy is very attractive, because if you have the ability to produce nuclear fissile materials, then you can build nuclear weapons really, really quickly within a year or so, or maybe even more quickly. And South Korea has advanced delivery mechanism.
Yes.
And so it has everything but nuclear weapons, which is actually the title of my book that I'm writing, Everything But the Bomb.
Everything but the bomb.
Yeah. But then that period of time, I mean, because it took North Korea a long time to build nuclear weapons. But if South Korea has the ability to go nuclear very, very quickly, then it will have to suffer whatever sanctions or whatever the costs maybe just for a year. And then after that, well, we already have them. So
I've been thinking about how they've been South Korea here of very late, building up its delivery capabilities. Once the missile what was that called? The missile.
the Hyunmoo missile,
Well, not the missile itself, but it had a restriction that it signed
the
with the United
missile
States.
guidelines.
Guidelines. That was the word I was looking for. When that was rescinded quickly, they started building capabilities that exceeded the guidelines previous, which is, to your point, maybe everything but the bomb.
Yes.
Well, let's examine another key player in the region, Japan. And in fact, they're probably could, if they had the desire, could go quicker. But Japan's strategic posture has been undergoing significant shifts, as evidenced by introduction of 3 critical security policy documents just a year ago, right? The National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, and the Defense Buildup Program. These documents highlight Japan's increasing commitment to regional defense, particularly in relation to Taiwan, and its intention to develop capabilities that align with this goal. Additionally, the proposal of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in February 2022 to consider a nuclear sharing agreement with the US, akin to NATO's model, that represents a potential departure from Japan's long-standing non-nuclear principles. So in light of these developments, and considering the regional threats that are posed by North Korea and China, how do you view Japan's evolving security landscape? Specifically, I guess I'm interested in your thoughts on how these external pressures and strategic considerations might influence Japan's adherence to its non-nuclear principles.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Japan, as you mentioned, Japan has been sticking to the 3 non-proliferation principles of not possessing, not producing, and not permitting the introduction of nuclear weapons. And the nuclear allergy is real in Japan, the public's antipathy toward nuclear weapons. I think that is real. However, as you mentioned, that there are some politicians that are calling for nuclear sharing. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, what he said was very significant. He said, the nuclear option shouldn't be considered as a taboo anymore. And I mean, he didn't go far as to call for the independent nuclear armament, but he has been talking about the redeployment of the US's tactical nuclear weapons to Japan, which will be a violation of the 3 non-proliferation principles. But the situation is changing, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Many Japanese politicians felt very nervous, and especially China's increasing assertiveness, the conflict over Senkaku Island, and Taiwan contingency. I mean, Japan is very close to Taiwan, especially some islands in the south. And so, that may actually, if the strategic environment changes dramatically, that it's possible that Japan may consider a nuclear option. And Japan actually, unlike South Korea, Japan can build nuclear weapons very quickly if it decides to do so, because it has plutonium reprocessing capability. And so far, through its civil nuclear program, Japan has produced enough plutonium to build, according to some estimates, 6,000 nuclear weapons. And I mean, and then Japan doesn't really need this much plutonium, right? I mean, since Fukushima, it has not been even running nuclear power plants very actively. Nonetheless, Japan is refusing to shut down its plutonium reprocessing facilities. That makes some believe that maybe Japan wants to hold on to this option of building nuclear weapons if need be.
Thank you for that. Let us turn in the context of the AUKUS security agreement with Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. How do you perceive Australia's role as a potential threshold nuclear state in the Indo Pacific? Specifically, what impact might this enhanced military capability have on regional security dynamics and Australia's long-standing position on nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament?
Yeah. Well, just to begin with, I mean, to briefly just talk about some details of the deal, according to the recently announced the plans, like implementation plan, the United States will provide Australia with 3 to 5 nuclear power submarines starting from 2032, and from 2040, Australia will be able to manufacture its own nuclear power submarines, and it will have significant military implications for the region. To begin with, the sheer number of nuclear power submarines, the United States and its allies, the UK and Australia, will increase significantly. Even before 2032, the US and then the UK will make rotational deployments of their nuclear power submarines to Western Australia. So this deal will significantly increase the US and its allies' collective underwater capabilities that will help them detect and neutralize China's warships and submarines, and then increase their power projection capabilities, and etc. And symbolically also, it's very important because, of course, Australia has been a very important ally of the United States, but and also maintained a pretty strong economic partnership with China. But now by signing this deal, it's clear that Australia made a strategic choice to support the US's military and regional strategic objectives. But when it comes to its implications for the non-proliferation norms, I actually don't consider Australia as a nuclear threshold state because Australia doesn't have the ability to acquire nuclear weapons quickly because, as you know, Australia has been a very anti-nuclear and therefore it doesn't have civil nuclear program. And so it doesn't have the ability to convert the nuclear fissile materials that are, produced in the naval reactor and the nuclear power submarines to nuclear weapons. It just simply doesn't have the capability to do so. And just not to be too technical, but the submarines that will be transferred to Australia will be fueled by highly enriched uranium, which means that ordinarily transferring ATU is problematic, but the submarines will not need refueling for many decades because they're fueled by highly enriched uranium, and therefore Australia will not have to open naval reactors. So I don't really think that will have a proliferation. It raises proliferation concerns, and I think Australia will stick to, as far as I know, for now anyways, Australia doesn't have the intention to take advantage of this deal for building nuclear weapons.
I think I see it that way as well. As we approach the final segment of our discussion, I'd like to pivot towards those questions that were submitted by the audience at registration. And so in our remaining, I guess about 10 minutes, let's go ahead and look at a couple of these categories. So the first one we'll look at is nuclear policy and regional security. That's the category. How are global nuclear policies and experiences, like the deproliferation by Ukraine, you recall in 1994, the Budapest Agreement that took back those weapons that the Soviets had there, And then the nuclear proliferation that's going on with North Korea. How is this shaping the strategic and nuclear decisions of these nuclear threshold states in the Indo Pacific? And what impact does this have on regional security and economic stability?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I realize that I have to answer briefly. We are running out of time, but yeah, obviously, Ukraine's. I mean, the failure of the U.S., the U.K., and Russia to keep the promise of protecting Ukraine's territorial integrity sends a strong, significant message to those non-nuclear weapon states, especially Russia's threat to use tactical nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon state also sends a strong message that ultimately you cannot rely on other countries' empty promises, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. When it comes to their national security. And also with North Korea now, many experts in America are talking about the possibility of arms control deal instead of denuclearization deal. That also sends the message that, okay, if you acquire nuclear weapons, you just suffer a little bit. You have to suffer, but once you acquire nuclear weapons, then you join the nuclear club. And so that would potentially incentivize non-nuclear weapon states to build nuclear weapons. And obviously, if that happens, the nuclear proliferation will have significant impact for regional and global security.
It's going to be a difficult challenge going forward. I can see this. Strategic defense and deterrence is the next category. What comprehensive defense strategies and counter-proliferation measures are Indo-Pacific countries implementing in response to these regional nuclear threats? And how does this align with their perceptions of the U.S.'s nuclear deterrent capabilities?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the counter-proliferation means efforts to prevent further nuclear weapons proliferation. And in order to do that, the United States has been trying to assure its allies and partners in the region of their security guarantee. And the Washington Declaration is one example. And the two sides of South Korea and the United States just held their second nuclear consultative group meeting last week. And so the United States has been doing a lot, by, for example, getting South Korea more involved in its nuclear planning. And now they're talking about potentially bringing Japan in the nuclear consultative group. And so these measures, we'll have to see whether those measures will be successful in really removing the skepticism toward extended deterrence. But so that's sort of an example of efforts that the U.S. is making.
Let's turn to nuclear non-proliferation efforts. What initiatives are central to mitigating nuclear threats and maintaining nuclear-free Indo-Pacific, considering the roles and the responsibility of nuclear armed states?
Yeah, I mean, this region is the most heavily nuclearized region. I don't think that it would be realistic to make that region a nuclear-free region. However, I think it is important for the nuclear weapon states in the region to try to reduce tension and foster some sort of a confidence building measures. I'm not talking about, I'm not asking them to be just best friends, but at least they should be able to have direct military communications or hotline so that they don't get into they don't go into an unnecessary and unwanted accidental nuclear war. The United States and China and the two leaders of those countries agreed to restore direct communication channels in San Francisco last month. But so far, it seems like they haven't been able to restore the channel or hotline. And other countries, also India and Pakistan, their communication channels are not functioning properly. But at least we should be able to have a mechanism where people can, different countries, and even adversaries can communicate so that, they can avoid a consequences outcome that they don't want. And it's not that difficult. And then they have the responsibility to do so, because if there is a nuclear conflict, that will trigger a nuclear winter, ending the humanity And so if you want to have nuclear weapons, then try to be responsible.
I can't agree with you anymore. I think that history has shown us that it is, with regards to nuclear weapons, it is the absence of a means to communicate that when crisis occurs, that we have only just been lucky that we haven't actually had an exchange of nuclear weapons. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, there was no direct communications. We were counting on workarounds, and as you peel back the history, we were just lucky that we didn't actually perhaps have a use of nuclear weapons. I was on the Korean DMZ, was up at a fire base, an artillery base, in September of 83. It was my second time up there. And it was when Korean airline 007 was shot down by the Russians. And the Korean airline had inadvertently flown over into Russia. And we thought that that was the extent of the crisis. But actually, after time, we realized, in fact, Russia, during this period, we had no communications. They perceived they had picked up several false tracks of incoming ICBMs from the United States during that. And this was just an episode in this crisis that they were trying to make sense of, and there was no communication. And I have other experiences of these in conventional circumstances, but I must foot stomp what you've said. That is the basic bare minimum of what we need to be able to be responsible. Let me turn to one last question with a quick response. In the context of North Korea's missile capabilities and the doctrinal use of tactical non-strategic nuclear weapons, what are key factors influencing military strategies and nuclear proliferation in the Indo Pacific?
Yeah, just really briefly, I mean, North Korea claimed that it has miniaturized its nuclear weapons, small enough to mount on short and medium range nuclear weapons, which means that North Korea can directly target South Korea and Japan with tactical nuclear weapons. And as I mentioned earlier, North Korea may have the ability to launch a nuclear attack against the United States. And so now then the threat perception among South Koreans and Japanese will be even higher. And that would incentivize them to consider and contemplate nuclear option, which we talked about earlier.
As we conclude, Lami, I wonder if you might share a book recommendation with us.
Yeah, so I was asked to pick a book, which was really difficult, but I picked this book, Nuclear Politics, The Strategic Causes of Proliferation, written by Alexander Debs and Nuno Monteiro, published by Cornell University Press in 2017. And it's a very good intro to nuclear politics. It talks about why states acquire nuclear weapons, try to acquire nuclear weapons, and when they are successful in doing so. It talks about the role of the extended deterrence and a lot of other things. And so, I highly recommend this book if you are interested in nuclear politics.
Thank you. Today's deep dive into nuclear Indo-Pacific has been just enlightening. Thank you for your time, Lami. We thank our guests for submitting very thoughtful questions and for joining us today. Let's continue to strive toward a secure and resilient future in the Indo-Pacific region. I'm excited to invite you to join me on January 16th in the new year for a focused discussion titled Power Play in South Asia with my esteemed colleague, Professor Sham Tukwani. We'll delve into the subregion's geopolitical landscape, examining post-election dynamics, India's regional relationships, the impact of internal political systems and regional politics, and the crucial influence of ethnic groups. This promises to be an insightful session offering a unique opportunity to deepen our understanding of these critical issues. With that, I'm James Minnich, your host of Security Nexus webinar, and I encourage you to stay vigilant and well-informed. And until we meet again, aloha.